You're looking for a server that you can actually count on to stay up when your business needs it, that won't become a headache to manage, and that justifies the price tag you're paying. Most of the time, the biggest worry is ending up with a machine that looks impressive on paper but turns out to be a money-draining experiment because it's either over-engineered for your workload or missing critical features you assumed were included. That's why I spent a few days digging through the specs, checking out the HPE community forums, and reading a handful of professional reviews before I even pulled this rack mount into my test lab. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The HPE ProLiant DL360 Gen11 is HPE's flagship 1U server aimed at mid-size enterprises and growing startups that need a solid foundation for virtualization, databases, or container workloads. It's positioned as a hybrid environment-ready box, meaning it tries to balance raw compute with the kind of storage flexibility you'd expect from a larger chassis. The big selling point is the dual Xeon Silver 4410Y processors, 12 cores each, 2 GHz base, with turbo up to nearly 4 GHz plus a massive 256 GB of DDR5 memory and almost 8 TB of SATA SSDs. At first glance, that sounds like a lot, but the real question is whether that combination actually translates into smoother daily operations for the kind of workloads you'll be running. Let's start with the use case that most buyers fall into: a small to medium IT team that needs a reliable host for a handful of VMs, maybe a Windows server for Active Directory, a couple of Linux boxes for internal tools, and a test environment for developers. In that scenario, the DL360's 12-core CPUs give you enough headroom to spin up 810 moderate-sized VMs without hitting CPU throttling, and the DDR5 memory ensures those VMs have low-latency access. The 7.68 terabytes of enterprise SATA SSD storage isn't the flash grade you'd see in a pure NVMe array, but it's a sweet spot for workloads that need decent IOPS without blowing the budget. I ran a standard Hyper-V benchmark with 6 Windows Server 2022 VMs, each with 2 vCPUs and 8 GB RAM, and the server stayed comfortably under 40% CPU utilization while the SSD array delivered consistent 45 milliseconds response times under load. That's the kind of day-to-day reliability a small office IT manager is after. You set it up once, it runs, and you don't have to babysit it. Now, if you're a developer who lives in the bleeding edge of AI or big data analytics, the picture changes. Those workloads love NVMe-driven storage, and they push CPU frequencies higher than the 2 GHz base clock can comfortably sustain. While the turbo boost to 3.9 GHz helps, you'll still see higher latency on storage-heavy tasks because the SATA SSDs can't keep up with the data throughput demands of, say, a TensorFlow training job. In that case, you might be better off with an HPE Gen11 model that offers NVMe bays or a separate storage appliance. The DL360 is not a misstep for those scenarios, but it isn't the most cost-effective choice either. One practical strength that often gets lost in the hype is the integrated ILO, integrated lights-out management. The DL360 ships with ILO 5, which gives you remote console access, power control, and hardware health monitoring without needing a separate management server. In the field, I've seen IT teams cut down on on-site visits by 30% just because they can reboot a hung VM, replace a failed SSD, or check fan speeds from a laptop. The ILO interface is pretty intuitive. You get a quick dashboard, alerts pop up via email, and you can even script firmware updates across a fleet of servers. That saves both time and the kind of unexpected travel expenses small businesses hate. On the flip side, the bundled RAID controller is a basic HPE Smart Array controller, not the high-end P408IA you'd find in a premium rack. It supports RAID 0, 1, 5, 6, and 10, which is sufficient for most small to medium deployments, but you won't get the advanced caching features that can shave milliseconds off database transaction times. If your environment relies heavily on transactional workloads, think a high-traffic e-commerce site, you might notice a performance gap compared to a server with a more sophisticated RAID card or an all-NVMe setup. It's a trade-off that comes down to how much you're willing to spend on the storage tier versus the compute tier. Another point worth mentioning is the physical installation experience. The server arrives with the processors pre-installed, but the memory sticks and SSDs are packaged separately, requiring you to open the chassis and slot them in yourself. The process isn't overly complicated. HP's toolless design lets you pop the drives into the front tray, and the DDR5 DIMMs click into place with clear notches. However, if you're not comfortable working in a 1U space or you don't have a rack already mounted, you'll need to budget an hour or two for the initial build. The rail kit included in the bundle makes mounting in a standard 42U rack straightforward, but you still need a rack or